Welcome to the sixth episode of our show, Pakistan, a hard country, where we delve into the complex realities of Pakistan through the lens of Anatol Lieven's thought-provoking book.
Great to be diving in.
Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into Chapter 5, titled The Military. Our mission is to understand the unique role and characteristics of Pakistan's armed forces based on Lieven's analysis from pages 136 to 173.
Right.
We'll explore its internal dynamics, its relationship with the state and society, and its strategic thinking.
And Lieven kicks things off with a pretty bold statement, doesn't he? He calls the Pakistani military remarkable, not just, for a developing country, but specifically for Pakistan itself.
Yeah, remarkable. What exactly does he mean by that? What sets it apart, in his view?
Well, he really drills down into qualities like discipline, efficiency, and this incredible sense of internal solidarity.
Okay. Discipline, efficiency, solidarity. And these aren't just like abstract ideas for him.
Not at all. He argues these are the very things that have allowed the military time and again to either take control directly or, pull the strings from behind the scenes.
So that internal strength, that cohesion, is the foundation of their power over the state.
That's the core argument, yes.
Yeah.
And naturally, that kind of power, that influence, it translates into real benefits for the institution itself.
Benefits like financial ones.
Exactly. Lamine details how they've used this position to secure, significant financial advantages. Which leads us straight into this concept of military ink.
Military ink. Right. That term paints a picture of something pretty substantial economically speaking.
It really does. He explores how the military isn't just a fighting force, it's become a major economic actor in its own right, controlling these huge business empires.
Wow. So what kind of scale are we talking about, and how do the officers themselves justify this? It seems unusual from the outside.
The scale is vast, covering all sorts of sectors, land, manufacturing, services, you name it. As for justification, Lieven talked to officers, and what often came up was this comparison.
A comparison.
Yeah, they'd point to their lifestyles, saying they were relatively frugal compared to civilian officials.
Okay.
And they also mentioned the whole nomadic nature of military life, constantly moving,
Right. Postings all over the place.
Exactly. So the argument goes, they need this system, the land grants, the business opportunities to provide some long-term security, especially for housing and for their families after they retire. It's presented as a kind of necessary support structure.
That's a really interesting perspective from inside. It helps understand their rationale, even if others see it differently.
Definitely. And thinking about the military's place in society, Lieven then shifts to recruitment. He focuses on one area in particular, the Potwar region in Punjab.
Ah, yes, Potwar. Why is that region so significant for military recruitment?
It has this incredibly long, deep-rooted history of military service. We're talking way back, even before Pakistan existed, back to the British Indian Army.
So it's embedded in the culture, families serving for generations.
Precisely. But there's another crucial point Lieven makes. The military is Pakistan's largest middle-class employer. Think about that.
The largest. That's huge.
It is. And for many people, maybe from the lower middle classes, joining the army is a major route for social advancement.
So it offers a way up: education, healthcare, stability.
Absolutely. It can be the path into the educated middle class. So it's not just a job. It's shaping the social structure of the country in a pretty profound way.
So it's this complex institution, defense force, economic player, and an engine for social mobility. But Lieven also talks about something else, this national security state mentality.
Yes, and this is really critical to understanding their worldview.
What shaped that? Where does it come from?
You have to look back at the very beginning, Pakistan's creation. Lieven explains the leadership felt incredibly vulnerable right from the start.
Vulnerable how? Internally or externally?
Both, really. Internally, forging a nation out of diverse groups was a massive challenge. Externally, obviously the relationship with India was tense from day one, but there were also early issues, like Afghanistan's claims on Pakistani territory.
So a feeling of being threatened on multiple fronts.
Exactly. And this constant sense of danger, almost existential threat, bred this deep-seated national security state outlook.
And how did that outlook manifest itself?
It led to a certain distrust of parts of their own population, a heavy reliance on intelligence. Think the ISI and this fundamental belief that the army was the only thing holding the country together.
the ultimate guarantor of national unity.
That's the perception Lieven describes.
And this security focus must have driven their foreign policy, particularly towards Afghanistan and Kashmir, where the ISI became so central. Let's talk about strategic depth. What was the thinking there?
Okay, so two key areas. For Kashmir, Lieven argues Pakistan's long-term goal was always about accession to Pakistan, not really about independence for Kashmiris themselves.
Right.
And the ISI played a big role by backing pro-Pakistani, often Islamist, groups, which kind of sidelined the more secular, independence-focused JKLF over time.
Okay, and Afghanistan, the strategic depth idea.
That was driven primarily by the fear of being encircled by India. The nightmare scenario was having India to the east and a hostile, potentially Indian-allied government in Afghanistan to the west.
A two-front situation.
Exactly. So supporting the Afghan Taliban, from this perspective, was about ensuring a friendly or at least compliant regime in Kabul. That's the strategic depth, having a secure western border if things escalated with India.
But Lieven doesn't shy away from the fact that this strategy was and is hugely controversial.
Absolutely not. He acknowledges the widespread criticism both from outside Pakistan and, importantly, from within.
Including that label, the Army for Hire accusation. Where did that come from?
A lot of that relates to the post-9/11 period. The support for the Taliban became incredibly problematic internationally.
Understandable.
And even inside Pakistan, people questioned if this policy was ultimately hurting Pakistan's own security and reputation. Lieven also points out significant resistance within the army itself after 2001.
Resistance to what?
To the intense pressure from the U.S. to crack down hard on the Afghan Taliban and their supporters within Pakistan. Many officers apparently felt they were being pushed into fighting America's war on their own soil.
That adds another layer of complexity. Okay, shifting gears slightly, another major concern often raised is nuclear security. Pakistan's arsenal. How secure does Lieven think it is?
This is obviously a huge topic. Lieven's assessment, based on his research at the time, was actually quite reassuring in some ways.
Reassuring. How?
He believed the weapons were under extremely tight control, heavily defended, and managed by personnel who go through intense vetting.
So robust safeguards in place.
That was his view. He emphasizes that the military leadership sees these weapons as their ultimate deterrent, their crown jewels, really. Proliferation would undermine everything they stand for.
So the internal risk is low in his assessment.
Relatively low, yes. Interestingly, he suggests a potentially bigger danger might actually come from outside fears, like the U.S. worrying so much that it contemplates some kind of preemptive action.
Which could backfire spectacularly.
Precisely. That kind of action could destabilize everything and create the very crisis it was meant to prevent.
A sobering thought. Finally, let's touch on the Army's internal dynamics. Lieven talks about unity, discipline, and how that relates to military coups, which have been a recurring feature in Pakistan.
Yeah, he stresses how this commitment to unity and sticking to the chain of command is just drilled into officers and soldiers from day one.
It's part of the core identity.
Absolutely. And that, plus the career paths and benefits tied to loyalty, makes coups from lower down the ranks extremely unlikely. It acts as a powerful obstacle.
So if coups happen, they aren't spontaneous uprisings from below.
According to Lieven, no. He points out that every single successful military takeover in Pakistan's history was led from the very top by the Chief of Army Staff with the backing of his senior commanders.
Always top down. That tells you a lot about the internal power structure.
It really does.
Yeah.
It reinforces that image of a highly disciplined, hierarchical institution, even when it's acting outside the Constitution.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot from just this one chapter. What are the main takeaways when you stand back and look at Lieven's portrait of the military?
Well, I think the first thing is just how multifaceted it is.
Yeah.
It's clearly not just an army in the conventional sense.
Right. It's deeply embedded in the economy and society as this vehicle for social mobility.
And it's obviously a dominant force in politics and strategic thinking, shaped profoundly by those historical anxieties we discussed.
And that internal cohesion, the discipline he emphasizes, seems key to understanding how it maintains that dominance and influence.
Exactly. It's the bedrock. But as Lieven highlights, that very strength can also feed into the national security state mentality and lead to policies, like in Afghanistan, that draw significant criticism.
It's a double-edged sword in a way.
You could say that. Which brings us to the final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah, after hearing all this from Lieven's perspective, How do you think this unique nature of Pakistan's military, its power, its economic role, its internal culture impacts the country's political path forward?
And its relationship with the rest of the world?
Mm,
What are the potential pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses of having such a central, powerful, and economically involved military institution in the long run?
Definitely a lot to think about there, considering everything we've just unpacked from Lieven's analysis. It's a complex picture with no easy answers.